For joining us today. My name is Erin Tinnen with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Today's webinar is Fostering Healing and Resilience for Children and Families Impacted by Domestic Violence, the 7th webinar of our new series, Building Trauma-Informed Services for Youth, Children, and Parents Impacted by Domestic Violence. Our trainer today will be Susan Blumenfeld, MSW, LCSW, and Child Trauma Training Director for the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Before we get started, I'll go over some of the technical details of the WebEx software that we will be using for today's webinar. Many of these details are explained on the Using this WebEx System tab on the upper left-hand side of your screen. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC. On the right-hand side of the screen, there are multiple boxes. The second from the top is the chat feature. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your fellow colleagues, as well as get in contact with the trainers or myself if you have any questions regarding the training content. You may also contact Jennifer Curley, also with the center, if you have any questions troubleshooting the WebEx software. To do this, click the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You will see a lot of options, but for this session, you'll want to select all participants if you would like to respond to a question from the trainer or contact me anytime during the session. You should click on Jennifer Curley to privately contact her if you're in need of troubleshooting the WebEx software. So let's test this chat feature. Will everyone please go to the chat box, click on all participants, type in the program that you are calling from, and then press enter? Wonderful. Thank you all so much for helping us test that. You can continue to do so, and I'll keep explaining the details. So while folks can get a lot out of the chat feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and can feel a little bit distracting. If this is true for you, you can feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with the same arrow if you choose. We will be providing live captioning during this webinar. Below the chat box, there is a media viewer box. This will contain the captions. If you do not want to see the captions, click on the down-facing arrow next to the word Media Viewer, the same way you might if you want to hide the chat box. At the end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a very brief evaluation. Please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better. If you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Sometimes the sound cuts in and out due to internet connection, so feel free to call into the conference line if that's a problem for you. If you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to get in touch with Jennifer Curley, you can call the WebEx tech support to resolve any issues. That phone number, which we will also post in the chat box, is 1-866-229-3239. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will now turn the training over to Susan.
Thank you, Erin, for that introduction. I wanted to welcome everybody to our 7th webinar in this series. And we're going to get started. So if you haven't already, I would encourage you to check us out on our website. We've got lots of wonderful resources, and we're also here to answer questions and help out with things that would be helpful to you in your program. So as we do in each of these webinars, we're going to take a moment now to come into the present moment and calm and center with our breath. So if you'll just get comfortable in your chair and maybe gently shake out your arms and legs and get rid of any kind of energy that's no longer serving you and just kind of get comfortable. And then I would just invite you to take a deep breath in and then release it through your mouth. Another deep breath in through your nose, and then out through your mouth. So now that we've fully arrived together at this moment, I wanted to welcome you again, and also to say, as I have in each of these, that use your own mindful awareness as you go through this webinar, as we go through it together, and feel free to get up and stretch, doodle, take a break, knowing that the webinar will be archived and you can come back to it at any time. Thank you for being here. So in today's webinar, we're going to revisit a resiliency-based framework called SASS that stands for Safety, Attachment, Self-Regulation, and Self-Esteem, Self-Agency that I introduced in the first webinar. And we're going to look at how we can apply these aspects in your day-to-day work, and also at forming relationships with protective parents to support their children's healing, that process of healing and resilience. And we know that by the relationships that we form, we're really able to help survivors and their children on their own journey. And so we're going to look at that a little more deeply today, too. So this is a definition that's a pretty standard definition that we've used in the past to define resilience, and we've certainly spent time in previous webinars talking about the traumatic effects of experiencing domestic violence and other trauma or adversity on children and teens and survivors and on their relationships. And it's essential to balance that knowledge and understanding with our belief and understanding about our capacity as human beings for resilience. So here's a bit of a recap. Ann Maston, who has been doing research resilience for a number of years, reminds us that it's not something that's for the special few, but that it's really ordinary magic that we all have the capacity to be resilient and to thrive in our lives. The other thing that the resilience research points out to us is the importance of a consistently loving, nurturing relationship with a parent or other adult invested in the child's well-being over time. And I think this is so significant because, as I've said in the past and others have said, that protective parents can be the single most important resource for fostering their children's resilience and healing from the traumatic effects of domestic violence. Again, with the recap, we're looking at some other factors that support resilience. So when we say the child's innate resources, we're really talking about temperament, personality, natural intelligence, which is what we're born with. And I always like to add here that sometimes our full potential in terms of our intelligence and our learning can get hampered by the traumatic experiences that we have. And when we get the support that we need, we can really blossom in that way. So our capacities may be hardwired into our DNA and innate, but they can also grow and build over time with our experiences. And the second one is sense of self-agency, which really is about what I need matters and I can make it happen by expressing those needs to others, and as we become older, by doing things for ourselves, and knowing that what we think, believe, and feel can have an effect on those around us and on the world that we're living in. Another way to talk about it is, I can do this. And it's opposite of what Martin Seligman, who studied folks and talked about learned helplessness in situations that come up when people experience adversity. It's the opposite of that. And then certainly our beliefs, values, and our family practices contribute to our resilience. So family traditions that we may have, like summer picnics for extended family, or our religious and spiritual beliefs and practices, our pride in our ethnicity and culture. And then supports for the child and family, that really refers to a totality of resources that are available for children and for us at any given time within our families, extended family, however we're defining family, our community, and the responsiveness of the service systems that we turn to for help and support. So for some of you, this SASS framework, this resiliency-based approach may be new. And so I would just invite you to take it in, think about what its relevance might be for your work. For those of you who have attended prior webinars, I think this is an opportunity then to think more closely about this and how you are going to apply this and how you have been applying this in your work, in your day-to-day work, and to deepen your practice around this and think more about how maybe you'll get some new ideas today or new insights as we're going through this. And all of the components in SASS, in the acronym SASS, are interrelated and interconnected and build on each other. And so we'll see that as we go through. So healing from exposure to interpersonal violence begins by restoring a sense of both physical and emotional safety within the context of our attachment relationships and other relationships with those we trust. So the first S is for safety. So when we're young, our caregivers really signal to us what's safe and what's not. And so we know that in domestic violence, our sense of physical and emotional safety can get breached over and over again. And it's important to keep in mind that often parents need to help children reestablish that sense of safety and felt security. As different events occur in the family's life or the child or teen's life, and some examples of that might be, let's say that an abusive partner had been in jail and is now out and has been given, is court-ordered for unsupervised visits, or a parent violates an order of protection and breaks into the house. So again, in both of those situations, I'm thinking about a post-separation scenario, but it's not like safety is achieved and then we go, whew, and it's all over. And that's part of the complexity and the heartbreak of this, I think, that we experience personally and in our work with families. But parents can play a really critical role in providing reassurance and taking protective actions when possible to do this. And we know that survivors are tremendously courageous in their attempts to keep their children safe when DV is ongoing, and it may be severe. And we know that commonly survivors try to shield their children from seeing and experiencing the violence. They've thought through escape plans. They've talked to their children about it, or we've helped and supported in that process. Sometimes the protective actions that survivors take can be misconstrued by others. And this can, particularly when other systems intervene, such as the child welfare system. So what I'm thinking about is that survivors tell us that often they will do things to agree with or placate their abusive partner because they anticipate that that is going to lessen further harm to themselves and their children. And that may include disciplining their children in a way that they may not choose to do, but they know that it might lessen what would be experienced otherwise. And it can also be involved with the decision to stay or return to an abusive partner. So I think it's always important to keep that in mind within the parameters of what it means to be controlled through a pattern of domestic violence. And then, as I said, in the post-separation scenario, safety can get breached. I've found in working with parents over the years that sometimes just reassuring their children by saying, I've changed the locks, he's not going to be able to get in, the police have been notified, different kinds of things that give some verbal reassurance to children, and the younger the child, the more concrete the actions are and help them to know that safety was breached, but they can feel gradually safe again, and that the parent's going to be there to help them through that process. And of course, the parent herself or himself has to be feeling safe as well. But sometimes there's a mismatch between what the adult knows and what the child is feeling. So what helps to restore a sense of safety? So when children are living in a home with domestic violence, things can be very unpredictable. And the protective parent and children are unable to stop or control or even predict what the abusive partner may be doing next. So a lot of energy goes into surviving, just surviving. And so it makes sense then that restoring a sense of safety can come from creating or reestablishing predictability and structure. And so one of the things that I like to do is ask parents and families about what routines and structures they have at home that are important to them. And that might be before coming into shelter. And to think about that together. And I also think that when children know what to expect, particularly when they've experienced a lot of unpredictability, chaos from the violence and the pattern of DV that they've experienced, that when they know what's coming next and the parent can help them put some structure around that, they do better, they feel better. And that helps the protective parent, too, to feel more in control and confident. And it just kind of works together in a really nice, synergistic way. I've also found that it's really helpful in these situations, not only to have the daily routines and rituals established, but to anticipate and help with transitions or changes as they might occur. So, you know, we think about ways, I'm thinking about in like a preschool setting where a child graduates from one class in daycare to the next as they get older. And I think in the same way, parents can help anticipate what the transitions are going to be during the day and or in the child's life. And we can be really supportive in talking with parents about that and kind of brainstorming what might work for their particular child in this instant. The next piece in this is having the protective parent act as an emotion coach. And I think in our mainstream culture in the United States, we may be really good at paying attention to the physical needs of children, making sure they're fed and dressed, and if they scrape their knee, we clean it off. But we're less conversant and maybe less comfortable with noticing and attending to a child's emotional needs. And so by being an emotion coach and thinking about this in the context of domestic violence, the parent can be supported to help identify what the child might be feeling in the moment, as opposed to rushing to problem solve or fix it. And then normalizing those feelings and responses. So it's okay to feel sad or scared or upset or mad. And that helps in that process to develop the child's own feelings vocabulary, and it also models for the child through their parents' attention that it's okay to have these feelings. And then to be able to offer comfort and soothing when a child's having a difficult time re-regulating and feeling okay. Because with a scraped knee, I like this example of, you know, mother or parent soothing the child, cleaning up the Band-Aid, talking, saying, oh, I'm thinking about a 4-year-old, oh, you're okay now, your knee looks all right, I'm going to give it a kiss, and all of that. And the child may still be whimpering or upset, and the parent says, come on, you're okay, go back outside and play. And so I think in this situation, it's thinking about how do we stay present with the child through whatever feeling state they're in, and then when they're ready, help them to re-enter or return to an activity that they were doing before. So going back outside and playing, if that's the situation. But it might mean that they need just a little cuddling and being together, or maybe reading a story before. You know, each child's different, of course. So I think that's something that many of the parents that I've worked with have found very helpful. And I know myself, when we first started doing some of these trainings, I realized the ways in which I was not always a very great emotion coach myself. And so I've become, with my own child, so I've become more cognizant of that, and it helps. It really works. So I wanted to share that. And then the next one is creating a safe space to play, talk, express feelings, worries, or concerns. And so as advocates, we can be supportive to families where talking about feelings really might be a departure from what they're used to, and there may be many reasons for that. It may be that it's too scary or overwhelming, and we have kind of we don't talk about our business outside of the family, and we don't express this inside the family because not talking about what's going on, especially if we're feeling overwhelmed, is a way that we can cope or survive. So I'm saying all of this as a way of just reminding us ourselves that this can be a process with families. And if it's a large shift from how the family, what the family culture is, then to be sensitive to that and to think about it, and to encourage that this is something that can unfold in ways that are tolerable for the children and for their parents. Okay. So the next thing that I'd like to do is talk about an exercise that can be done individually with a child. And I would say probably I wouldn't try this with a child unless they've got amazing kind of fine motor coordination before they're 4 or 5. But so from age 4 and up. So it can be done individually with a child or in a small group with other children or as part of a family activity. And so draw a safe place, many of you may be familiar with. It's designed to create a personally meaningful visual representation of a safe place. And that safe place can either be real or imagined. And it's a place that the child can go to when they're feeling stressed or distressed. So you get, you know, markers, crayons, some paper. It's pretty easy. And some children may need prompts. They may have trouble thinking about a place that seems pleasant to them. And so they may need some help. So if they're talking about grandma's living room, they might need a prompt like, she has a soft blanket, you know, you would find out, you wouldn't suggest, but she has a soft blanket on the couch, and, you know, giving other sensory details that can make this place more vivid. And then once the child or teen has had a chance to draw this safe place, to invite them to talk about their picture. And this actually is something that can be used and helps promote self-soothing, which is also part of the SASS framework and is the second S, which is self-regulation, which we'll talk about a little more. So I've known kids to, particularly in shelter, to put the pictures that they've made up. The fact that they have it in their bedroom somewhere, or, you know, somewhere where they can see it. And then it's sometimes nice to have the visual representation in front of them as well. I would encourage you to try this out yourself first before offering this as an activity and see what it was like. Something that can be wonderful for the adults that you work with as well. We have this as, you've got a link today with the slides to our website, and you can download a handout that has different exercises for grounding and relaxation, and Draw a Safe Place is one of them. Okay, so how do we support protective parents to help their children? So the first part might be in figuring out really why is the child feeling unsafe in the moment. I mean, sometimes it's quite apparent. Something's happened. The parent's been there. They've seen it. I think about an example in a domestic violence shelter that I provided some consultation for, where their fire alarm went off accidentally, and a child just took off running. So, but sometimes we don't know why a child is feeling unsafe and what it is. So trying to really encourage parents to talk with their children, to look for the cues or clues. What are the circumstances? What's the context of what's going on? And then I think it's also helpful to know, well, is the child feeling scared and unsafe in general, or is this a change in the child's kind of normal day-to-day behavior that you know, the parents observed and now it's shifted? So I think all of those can be helpful, and we can have conversations like that with parents to help them sort this out. The next part is distinguishing between what's happening now and what's coming up from the past. So in prior webinars, we've talked about the whole concept of trauma reminders that may be feelings or sensations that come up in our bodies. It can be thoughts that we have, feelings, and sometimes children and adults may have trouble distinguishing between what is from the past that they're experiencing and what's happening right now. So sometimes children may lose touch with where they are currently. And last time we did a grounding exercise where we talked about helping children come back into the present moment through grounding through their 5 senses. The next part, the next dot point here is monitoring and limiting children's exposure to violent images in media and video games, which seem to be everywhere. And many of us may have worked with families where parents have not considered what the impact might be on their children, especially when their children have also experienced interpersonal violence at home or in their community. And I've found that, again, as kids get older, it may be harder to monitor, particularly video games. But I've found that just having a discussion about this and having parents contemplate limiting and kind of shielding and protecting their children from violence on, on TV and in movies, etc., that it can make a huge difference for children. Because I think part of what's happening is that if they have experienced violence and it's been traumatic and they've been scared, that seeing violence in the media or through video games really can reactivate and remind them of past experiences. And it's overwhelming, and it's really not good for their well-being. So there's a difference between if the parent is feeling safe, but the child is not, what kind of comes to play for protective parents when they're trying to help their children around this? And, whoops, sorry about that. Okay. And what I've found is that when our children are really distressed or not feeling safe, that it can be hard for us as parents to bear. And survivors may find themselves feeling activated by their children's responses, and it may be reminiscent of times when they wanted to protect their children from seeing or experiencing the violence and they couldn't. So I think as part of your role in supporting parents, you can find a private time to reflect with them about this if you realize that this may be part of what's going on and they're having a harder time helping their children to restore a sense of safety because of what's coming up for them, understandably. And the second part of this is that children take in more than we're aware of. Depending on their age, they may not always get an accurate sense of what we're talking about with other adults. And or we may be saying things within their earshot that we don't realize they're hearing. But even with young children, if we're feeling afraid or agitated or whatever, they may not fully understand what we're talking about, but they're going to experience and pick up our feeling tones, right? And as an advocate or counselor, it can be helpful to talk with parents about what their children are taking in, and also how to find protected space and time for adult talk. I think particularly in a communal living situation where survivors are getting support from and talking with others that have had similar experiences, that there can be a lot of talk and the kids are there in the room or around the edges. And so if we can think about how can we work within that kind of community to create some boundaries and place for parents to be able to talk about their feelings and fears, but in a way that protects their children from this. And then I think just as a reminder, we know that children are masterful at picking up on our nonverbal states too. So we can transmit our fear, sadness, or anger without words as well. Okay, so now we are going to go to the second letter in the acronym, A for attachment. And attachment and regaining trust in relationships. So part of reestablishing this sense of safety and felt security comes from knowing that the protective parent is available to the child to help organize feelings that might arise when the child's feeling upset or frightened, and to take actions like we were just talking about to protect their children within the limits of their control. And I think the other piece of this is that the very experience of domestic violence affects not only the child and the survivor, but can also affect their relationship and their relationship with others. And so if the relationship has been altered or disrupted as a result of experiencing domestic violence, then it becomes essential to reestablish that protective shield within the limits of the survivor's control, and to scaffold children's self-regulation and self-esteem within the context of a loving, attentive relationship. So I truly believe that our essence as human beings is in connection with others. And over the years in my own life and within my professional career, I've really come to believe in the centrality of connection, that it is essential for our health, for our well-being, and also for healing disconnection that happens when we experience pain, disappointment, adversity, and trauma in our lives and within our relationships. We also know that traumatic experiences can alter a sense of trust in relationships. And so I think this knowledge, which seems so obvious to us as we go through talking about trauma-informed ways of practice is really can be very challenging in our day-to-day work. And so I wanted to lay this out and give us a moment to reflect on this with the understanding that healing and resilience can happen in reconnection. So we introduced this phrase before, I think in the first webinar, about how you are is as important as what you do. And in our daily jobs, we're almost always stressed, stretched, managing tight time frames to garner resources on behalf of families. We're often called upon to respond in a moment to crisis situations, and our work is both demanding and rewarding. And when we're in the midstream of our work, it's helpful to remind ourselves to step out of the stream and to reflect on how we are in our relationships with others, in doing the work that we're doing that we love and that's so important. So I like to ask the question, what am I offering through the relationships I form with survivors and their children, whose lives I care about so deeply? So for some of us, it may be easier to think about just bringing ourselves into the work. And for others, we're more comfortable with making sure that the things that we know are so critical to families get done. And so what this reminds us is that it's important to have both. And that if healing takes place in reconnection, then how we are becomes a really critical element of that process of healing and resilience. So this is kind of over the years what I've come to feel are some of the elements of forming a relationship that fosters healing that advocates can have with survivors and their children and with each other. So being consistent and reliable and transparent. So we say what we mean and we do what we say in a way that's consistent and reliable. And we also acknowledge what our limits are. And we're transparent about that. And in addition to that, we're transparent about explaining what are the routines. If it's a shelter-based program, what are our routines or rules within the shelter? What are the limits of confidentiality in our program? How does that get defined? And there's another component of being transparent that helps deepen our relationships, and that is that for all of us, because we are human, we're inevitably going to make mistakes within any relationship that we have that's at all meaningful to us. So what we say might actually get misinterpreted, or we might find ourselves saying or doing something that later in retrospect we go, oops, I really missed the boat on this one. I really goofed. And so in being transparent, it means actually going back and saying, you know, I really didn't intend the way what I said came out, and or I'm feeling now that there's some tension and distance in our relationship, and if you're willing, I'd like to be able to see if we can talk about that together. So it's really the concept through transparency of being able to repair our relationships so that we can deepen them and so that we can reconnect. There are other ways in which and we're going to talk about this more in the next webinar, we're going to expand on some of this, but there are times in which it's nothing we say or do, but it may be that it's time to leave on our shift at the shelter, or we get sick and we don't come in to work, or we go on vacation. Hopefully, we're all going on vacation at times. And it gets interpreted in a way that we're not intending, which is if people have been hurt in relationships and there hasn't been trust there may be this sense of I'm not important enough or worthy enough for this person to be around when I need them. So we're going to talk some more about that and the concept that, and I've found that this has been very reassuring to many of the parents that I've worked with, when I let them know that actually, even though I'm on vacation or I'm not there at the center or the shelter, that I still think about them and their family when we're not together. We're not immediately present or together. And that can help. And that can be sort of a point of learning for some people that haven't experienced that before. The second part is joining with rather than doing for. Again, one of those things that may be easier said than done. I think about this in terms of child rearing and parenting as well, that sometimes it's easier, it feels easier and more efficient to just do something, get it done, have this for the family or for the parent, rather than joining with and really exploring what some of the barriers might be to meeting the goals that the parent has. And so thinking about scaffolding to support parents and not to do for, particularly in regard to their children, because then that can undermine their role. And we know that one of the typical dynamics in a pattern of domestic violence is that the survivor's role as a parent has been undermined. So we don't want to add to that. Noticing strengths and sharing our observations. I think that's so critical to look for those strengths. It does a lot to kind of rebalance some of the messages, feelings, either both internally or from others that survivors have gotten. And then really being patient around the fact that forming a healing, trusting relationship is a process. And we may be ready, present, and wanting to be there for this family in a way that not everybody in the family is ready to take in. And to not take that personally, but to remain constant, present, and reliable within that process. And so sometimes that means not getting too attached to what our goals are for a family, even if the parents express similar goals, and just being able to be with that parent, child, and children and family as the process unfolds. So it's tricky because part of what makes us effective is that we're so invested, and at the same time we have to have that sort of non-attachment. And so it's again, one of those things that's difficult to achieve, and sometimes we're better at it than others. Some days we're better at it than others. So, and I think this goes hand in hand with managing our own responses with mindful awareness and support. So we're not only kind of thinking about this and having it rattle around in our own heads, but talking to our peers, getting reflective supervision, and getting support around how our relationships that we're forming are going with the families that we're serving. One just kind of aside around this is that I have heard advocates say at times that, well, I didn't follow up with her because I'm really respecting this parent's self-determination and autonomy. And so I think sometimes it means stepping back and being honest with ourselves? Are we disconnected, and that's why we're not following up to find out why she or he may not have made that appointment that was going to be critical in getting a job or getting permanent housing for the family? So again, being honest with ourselves and kind of knowing when we might become reactive or too attached to a particular goal that we have, and the family might not quite be there with us at that moment and still hanging in there. So as I said, we're going to revisit this in more depth in the webinar that's coming up in January. So that's a teaser. Okay, so you may be looking at this graphic, the circle of security, for the first time. If you're just joining this series, I would encourage you to listen back to the first webinar and the third, where we talk about circle of security in somewhat more detail and give some background on how this got developed. But the circle applies to children, young children that are pictured here in the graphic, but children of all ages and teens, and can also be applied to us as adults in our relationships with intimate partners and friends and family. So many DV programs have found this graphic useful in framing their work with survivors because it sets the stage by thinking universally about children's needs to be seen and acknowledged for who they are, to be loved and cared for in a responsive way that can lead to that sense of felt security and a secure attachment. And we learn how to be in relationship with others before we have language. And I've talked about this before, but they're sort of what we would call implicit rules of relating that set the template for how we are in our relationships with others. So what I learned before I was a year old, I can carry into my other relationships as to what's safe to acknowledge or not in terms of my needs, and whether or not I can be fully seen for who I am. And I have to say that these kinds of templates that get set early are difficult to change because they're implicit. They take place before we have language. They're not connected to a particular event or time that we can recall or talk about. But they can also change through our relationships over time. Thank goodness, because I think for many, many of us, we're happy that we've had a chance to be able to transform some of this through our relationships as we go on in our lives. So we know now, after more than 35 years of research, that when children have secure attachments with parents and other caregivers, that they have more positive outcomes in their lives and their ongoing development. So very briefly, the folks that created Circle of Security talk about going out on the top of the circle and coming back on the bottom of the circle. And so the top of the circle is really related to the parent or parents or caregivers within this child's world create a secure base from which the child can go out, learn, explore, invest in mastery of age-related tasks. So separating from a caregiver to go to daycare or school would be an example of going out on the top. Being curious about our immediate world, learning in school, forming relationships with others, becoming more independent, and trying out new and novel situations. On the bottom of the circle, those hands are a safe haven to return to when a child is feeling upset, afraid, overwhelmed, or in danger. And if you look at the little box, it says, protect me, comfort me, delight in me, organize my feelings. So as you think about applying this in your work, it's really helpful to think about the parents that we're supporting and working with and where they might struggle on the circle based on their own, what they learned implicitly. And so this applies to all of us. So I don't want to say, the parents who have experienced domestic violence are going to struggle on the circle. We all struggle at different points on the circle. But again, it's being aware of this and how that survivor's particular experience as a child and then as an adult in experiencing domestic violence may be compromising the ability to be responsive to the child's needs on the top or the bottom of the circle. And then knowing that a pattern of DV in and of itself can affect responsive parenting. And over time, hopefully as parents can move to greater physical and emotional safety, it still may be difficult to respond to our children's needs around the circle when we ourselves are trying to navigate our own responses that may come up for us. And certainly in the midst of a domestic violence pattern where we're trying to navigate our own survival and protection of our children. And the final point here is thinking more individually about parents' relationships with each of their children. And they're different, and it can be because of the birth order of the child, their gender, who the father is of the particular child, life circumstances that have taken place, and where the parent might be in his own journey. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that we may see some variations and differences, and sometimes that can be frustrating when we see a parent being really responsive with their 3-year-old and unable to, let's say, be nurturing, comforting to their 8-year-old. And we wonder why they seem to have this capacity. So really thinking about and being open to reflecting on that. So we know that part of what creates healing and resilience is when parents can develop their own reflective capacity as parents and can stand back and understand their children's state of mind, feelings, and needs as separate from our own. And so I think, this can come up particularly because with domestic violence, there's situations and crises of safety that come up, and children may have mixed loyalties, and we've talked about this before, to the abusive partner as their parent, and they may have longings to be with the parent, and that then who is an abusive partner, and that can set up feelings in the protective parent, the survivor, and being able to really separate out what's me, what's my child. And our task as advocates is also being able to step back and reflect on the differences between our own state of mind, feelings, and needs as different from the responses that we're seeing in the survivors that we're working with and their children. And next time in our webinar, we're going to talk about the task of how do we hold in mind both the survivor and his children at the same time. But again, we know from the research that the more parents have that reflective capacity to see their children as they are and the needs that they have and separate from themselves, the more that leads to a process of resilience and healing. So I think this next slide really invites us to, again, be mindful of and explore how the parent's reflective functioning may have become altered as a result of ongoing experiences within a traumatic relationship, intimate partnership. Because that process itself can really shatter our ability to think about ourselves in a way with any distance, because we're shielding and trying to protect what we can to survive. So knowing that the protective parent may be really capable of wonderful reflective functioning, but just needs space and time for those abilities and capacities to kind of refill and come back. And again, depending on what we've experienced when we're growing up, whether or not we experience reflective functioning on the parts of our parents, if we did not, then through the relationship that we offer as advocates and mental health counselors, we can create that safe space for the parent's own reflection by being able to be with them and to offer that. And then in turn, through that experience, that can support parents to become more reflective about their own children's feelings and needs as separate from themselves and from their own needs. And so some people talk about that as a parallel process in terms of what we're able to offer through a trusting, healing relationship, and how that experience can get integrated for somebody, and they can then take that and give that to others, to their children. All right, so we're going to pause here to reflect a little bit, covered a lot of ground, see whether or not you have any thoughts or questions. If you're taking this in for the first time, there may be a lot going on for you, a lot that you're thinking about maybe in terms of your own life and your role currently. If you've had a chance to think about this before, I'm curious to know, did anything new come up now, and do you have some questions about this? So I'll wait to see from Jen. Let's see. Okay. So we have one question in the chat, which is, how can a parent, and I've just lost, oh, here we go. How can a parent provide reassurance for their child when they have to go for an unsupervised visit? And I'm thinking with the abusive partner, I'm thinking that the child has not been directly abused, but I'm not sure if that's what's implied in that question. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, and that's one of those pieces that's so difficult for parents. So we can't provide reassurance that's not real, but we can help a child anticipate what might be coming up for them and what's going to help them calm down, feel safer, feel less stressed as they're going on an unsupervised visit with the abusive partner, the former abusive partner. Now, again, it's really different depending on the age of the child. Certainly with the families I've worked with, the younger the child, the scarier it can be, because if the child's really dependent on the protective parent and or another important loving adult caregiver in the family system, and they have to go on this visit, it can be very frightening, and there are less adaptive coping resources that young children have. So there are things that can be done with very young children through pictures that, you know, we talked about how do you reestablish a sense of safety. So you can have pictures to illustrate for a young child, this is when you're going on the visit, and pictures about getting into the car, the drop-off, being at their parents' house. talking about what kinds of things they're going to do, and also what might be helpful if they find that they're getting scared. Hopefully they can call the protective parent. If not, we've talked about having a scarf or a little object or something to hold that's a reminder. If you've worked with a young child or older child around drawing a safe space, that can be, again, one of the ways in which children can try to re-regulate themselves and be brave in a situation that's really scary. And of course, being able to come back to and re-enter that safe space at home again with the protective parent and having some chance to get out those feelings, to talk about it, and to kind of think together about what they can do that either will be helpful to them in the future. And of course, if the protective parent is getting cues and signs that the child may be exposed to ongoing violence or direct abuse during the unsupervised visit, then really engaging in a process of advocacy and a court process to protect the child. And we know, of course, that that's not perfect either. So again, depending on the child and what kind of access to resources they have, that would be a way to provide some form of reassurance that's realistic. Okay, I'm just looking at what's in the chat box. Reflective supervision is a form of supervision in which we meet with our supervisor at a consistent, regular time, and we have the opportunity to explore the work that we're doing. And the space that we have feels safe, and we get ideas from our supervisor and kind of can get re-engaged with and aware of what's going on for us, and so we're re-energized, and it helps us reconnect. Okay, so let's see. I'm just looking at another question that Jen is showing me. Jen also put up, or Erin put up more information from our website on reflective supervision from previous webinars that this participant might be interested in. Okay, so there's another question that came up about so when there's a difference between what we're seeing as an advocate or mental health counselor and our viewpoint may be different than the parent's approach. So the parent doesn't want their children to talk about the abuse and feels that talking about it is going to make things worse. So again, I guess the short answer to that would be that that's something that we would talk about and explore together and find out where those beliefs come from. So did one of the children have an experience where something got discussed at school and came home and things were worse, or where children came home, felt kind of opened up to talk about something, but the protective parent is still living with the abusive partner, or the abusive partner comes back? So I mean, it's really got to be contextualized to the situation, and we would want to take our cues from the parent and respect where they are at. And as I said earlier, that if it's a post-separation situation and part of how the family has survived is by not talking about feelings, or that's a particular kind of family culture, then we're really asking people to consider something that feels like a huge shift. And so we'd want to go really slowly with that and present some things around it. And also, if in our relationship we begin to explore feelings with the parent, and the parent actually has a sense of relief and being heard and understood and feels better, then that experience in and of itself might be something that the parent might then be willing to consider and try out with his or her own children. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for those questions. And we're going to move on at this point. Okay, so now we're at the next S in the SASS framework that stands for self-regulation. And I think this is one of the most important parts of the healing process. As children, teens, and their parents in some ways learn to cope with overwhelming, frightening, and powerful feelings, thoughts, memories, body sensations that come up in ways that may be more adaptive now if they're in a situation in which they are physically safe. So we're going to explore this a little further. There are many strategies, including relaxation techniques and mindful awareness and meditation, that can be offered to children and their parents. And if you've attended some of the prior webinars, we've suggested a number of these practices. And I would invite you to go back over, look at them, think about what you've used. You may currently be using what's working, what's not, with the caveat that any of those kinds of strategies are not a one-size-fits-all, that may work at a certain point, and that we just need to be open to presenting these ideas and practices when the timing is right. And then, as any kind of practice for self-regulation, mindfulness, meditation, it takes a lot of repetition and practice. And so it's not the best time to begin a practice when we're in the midst of feeling overwhelmed. But if we have built up a practice and feel pretty comfortable, then we can draw on that at times when we are feeling stressed out and overwhelmed. So this component is also interrelated with the other components. So in order for the parent to act as a co-regulator for the child, if the child's starting to feel overwhelmed, the parent has to then within themselves feel calm enough and reflective enough to be there to help the child self-soothe and calm down and self-regulate. And so we know that this is one of those things that starts very early on, and we all look to our parents and caregivers as co-regulators when we're little. When we're babies, we're totally dependent, right? And gradually we begin to take on this capacity ourselves in many ways. But I know I've seen with babies that I've observed that sometimes they can kind of like grab onto, when they're able to do that, they can grab onto their, a piece of their clothing and suck thumb or pacifier in their mouth, etc., when they need some soothing and comfort. And by age 5, in general, children start to develop some adaptive coping where they can contain some of their strong feelings and they can delay gratification. Some kids are better at that than others, but we would still imagine that if something really upsetting happens, that children and teenagers are going to look to a safe adult to help them re-regulate. So it is a key capacity that gets that can get disrupted or derailed as a result of experiencing trauma. So our fear circuits are all alerted. We're scanning for danger. We may have an elevated heart rate, blood pressure that doesn't return to baseline. So this is such a critical element of healing and resilience, because as children are able to re-regulate, calm down, self-soothe, they can then take part in all the wonderful things that are part of daily life and begin to master what's going on, you know, for them at that particular time. And so some of that may be learning in school and learning to play a sport or a game, etc. So as an advocate, you can begin to incorporate some of these practices into your own work and support parents to learn these practices and teach their children. And we've talked about many of these in the past webinars, and I'm not going to go into them in detail now. On grounding, which we talked about last time, it can be helpful to re-enter the present moment when we have overwhelming feelings, thoughts, or body sensations. And so there are ways to do that. And then distraction, you know, that's something that I think parents do with young kids all the time. If they're starting to feel overwhelmed, sometimes you can distract them by offering them something else that's equally interesting to what they're grasping onto in the moment. And in the same way, when children start to get dysregulated, to help them become aware of what's going on internally for them and helping them disrupt those thoughts and focus on something else that's, instead of being negative, something that's positive. Okay. So now what I'd like to do next is to talk with you about a finger hold practice for managing emotions and stress. And again, this is a practice and a handout that's on our website. And Jen, who is hosting our webinars, also helped she really put this together. And as I've tried this out with a number of groups in person, many have found this really a helpful practice. So this was adapted from a series of practices by Capacitar that have been used around the world. And you can read more about this when you download the handout. So this practice is helpful because parents can teach their children. You can practice this and learn this as an adult. And we found that domestic violence survivors have found this practice useful when they're going into a stressful situation. So that might be going back into court, anticipating a custody visit. And the same for children. Maybe they're going into a new social situation and they feel uncomfortable and kind of nervous, or they've got a big test coming up at school, or something, they're anticipating an unsupervised custody visit, right? And they're anxious about it. So it can also be used as a way of calming down and managing emotions at a time of transition that might be difficult, particularly like at bedtime. It can be a time where kids get more revved up and it's harder to relax. And the beauty of this is that it's one of those on-the-go type practices that we can do at any time and use at any time, and it's not apparent to others what we're doing. So I know many, including myself, have used this practice when we're on an airplane, when we're about to take off and we're feeling a little nervous. So what I'd like you to do, each finger, as you can see from this diagram, is associated with a different set of emotions. And so if you'd like to, I'd invite you to join me in trying this. So if you'll take your ring finger, the fourth finger that symbolizes worry and anxiety, and you can use either the finger on either hand and wrap your other hand around it and hold it for a moment, for as long as you're comfortable. And we'll be silent for just a moment as you do this. Now breathe in a way that feels natural and comfortable for you, and just notice what you're feeling as you're grasping your ring finger. Most people find one hand maybe more comfortable to use than the other. You can experiment with this. And so now we'll come out of the practice, but I invite you to try this and also share this with parents and children that you think might benefit from this. The other, and really Jen's laid this out beautifully in the handout, but again, this may not be for everybody, and the practice and experiences with it can vary depending on what's going on. And then let us know how this worked. Be very interested to get your feedback. Okay, so another relaxation type activity that can be fun and that you can do, either you can engage the children directly or the family together, is thinking about, so what helps me relax or calm down or feel good when I'm stressed? And really inviting families to think about that, and each child to think about that. And then either they can write them down themselves, those ideas, or if it's a younger child, you can write them down for the child, or the parent can. And then hopefully include some that relate to some of the practices that you're already incorporating, that the family or this particular child or teen has found useful, that are working for them. And then something that might be uniquely, something that they enjoy doing. So that might be, I really love going out to the park and shooting some hoops, or I love to dance, or, so coming up with things that are customized for that child or adult. And then all kinds of creativity with decorating a jar. If it's a younger child, you can, you can do something with paper and glue and that kind of Mod Podge stuff on the outside of the jar, or you can get stickers, or you can just use a simple little box where you're going to put the ideas inside, and you can get stickers for younger kids to put on. And then you put the box in a special place, and this also leads to the child becoming more conscious of when they're stressed or not, and then it builds resilience and self-esteem because they've got things that they've already thought about and put in their special jar or box that they can go to and use when they feel the need. And the parent can help support that process as well. And they can have some fun with it too. So we've talked about this concept of, on the bottom of the circle, help with organizing feelings. Help organize my feelings on the bottom. And we know that kids that have experienced trauma may become more upset more easily and have more trouble returning to a state of calm. And last, in one of the prior webinars, I talked about the practice of the parent taking a time in. That's on the Circle of Security website that you all can check out if you haven't already, or listen to the first webinar. Another practice that we're going to look at now was created by Paris Goodyear Brown and her colleagues at Vanderbilt University, and she developed this protocol to help parents whose children had experienced trauma. And again, it's another acronym. If you're like me, you love acronyms, you may hate them, but it could be helpful or not. Again, as I said before, one size does not fit all. But here's the SOOTHE acronym. So when kids start feeling anxious or out of control, tantruming, dysregulated, parents often respond by escalating in their own response to their child. Been there, done that as a parent. I think we can identify with that. So, you know, the child starts saying, I'm not going to do this, and you're like, yes, you will. No, you're going to do this because I said so, right? Which, as the child gets older, feels more and more ineffective anyway. But what this reminds us to do is to use a soft tone of voice and to soften our face. So much gets conveyed, you know, non-verbally and through our voice and posture. So the child's feeling kind of escalating, and we can help just by how we respond. Then the second, the O, is to organize the child's experience. So, sounds familiar, the bottom of the circle. They don't talk about it quite in that way. What Goodyear Brown and her colleagues talk about is that idea of predicting with the child what's going to come next, which we talked about earlier when we talked about the first S in SASS. So helping with transitions, saying, okay, well, we're going to be getting ready to go in about 5 minutes now. So do you want to get your, put that away and get your clothes together and, get your soccer stuff ready? We're going to be going soon. So it's like kind of giving those early warnings. Also anticipating if a situation is going to be difficult for a child, and having the parent know that and think about that in advance and talk with their child about it if they can. The second O is offer choices or a way out. So, giving some limited choices really helps a child who's feeling like they have no control over a situation at least decide between my brown shoes and my boots. You can wear either one. Or sometimes we find that it's helpful to give kids a way out when they sort of dig in and refuse to do something. So, okay, so why don't I help you make your bed? Let me take this side of the blanket. We'll do this together, or some way of joining and scaffolding the child around a task so that it can get done and the child has a graceful way out. And then the T really refers, again, it's another nonverbal way of being close, conveying support and presence without words to a child, and that can be comforting and soothing. And then the H is really a part of what we talked about earlier in trying to understand what's the meaning of this child's behavior in the moment. Are they being defiant of us, or is it that they've really started to feel dysregulated and overwhelmed because something reminded them of something that was scary that had happened? So if we can step back as parents and support parents to scaffold their children in that way by understanding what might be going on, then we can respond in a way that disengages from an escalated conflict or battle between parent and child and really helps the child. And then the last part of this is it's part of that emotion coaching piece that I talked about earlier. It's like, when is the child kind of ready enough to let go of how they were feeling, and when are they ready to reintegrate back into either what the next thing is that they are going to or into an activity, knowing that kids are more vulnerable to that kind of physiological dysregulation if they've experienced trauma. And then the tricky part of this that can be hard for parents, and so I certainly have a lot of empathy as we're working to support parents around this, is that there may be things that were said or done that were hurtful, personally hurtful to the parent in this whole process. And so it's that maxim around being bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, and that we have to let go too and have enough distance so that we can attend to what the child needs and not take what was going on or what was said personally. again, that's always something that's a work in process, and on some days I think people can do that better than others. Okay, so the final S stands for, it's really a 2-for-1, for self-esteem and self-agency. And as I mentioned earlier, self-agency means I can get my needs met, I can ask for help, I can do things that are going to have an impact on my world in a way that's positive. So protective parents and other important adults in children's lives can help them overcome self-esteem issues by positively mirroring who they are and what they're capable of. And that's how we grow and develop in the very beginning, right? So children also develop a sense of themselves as capable and able to have an impact on their world and have self-agency when they can master developmental tasks at each stage of their development, and when they can really develop some special interests and talents that reinforce their positive self-esteem. And another important source of self-esteem and self-agency is that piece of being in connection and belonging to, we can belong to many groups that are important to us throughout our lives. And so that sense of really connecting and fitting in, and that can be part of having pride in our cultural and ethnic group or other groups that we're part of. And it can also come from deep beliefs and values and practices that we have in our lives. Okay. So reducing negative self-esteem. This is a slide that we've looked at previously. I'm not going to belabor it, but it's giving information that normalizes the child's behavior and sees it in context. Reassuring children that it's not their fault. Many kids, as part of a pattern of domestic violence, are exposed to a lot of verbal put-downs by the abusive partner. So it's trying to undo some of that, and then talking about other ways and taking a stance that violence is not okay. So building self-esteem and self-agency, kids have really benefited from doing a project from start to finish, like planting a seed in a cup or a garden. And a number of domestic violence programs that I've had the pleasure of working with have talked about doing community gardens and the excitement that kids feel and the benefits of these types of activities for feeling good about ourselves and nurturing something and seeing it grow. And again, the research on positive emotions tells us that having fun and feeling joyful expands our perspective on the world, and that if we can find ways to savor and store these experiences by repetition and recalling what happened, that really builds resilience. So as advocates, we can be curious with children and parents and say, what's fun for you? And also to help support parents to scaffold those structured family activities in a way that where you explore, so what might come up? So when you've tried this in the past, does it break down sometimes? Did the kids start fighting with each other? So anticipating what went right and what went wrong, and how you can construct it in a way that's really going to be a blast for everybody. So in the final slide about applying the SASS framework, I hope this has given you some more to think about in your own practice. And the first step is really noticing our own style and whether or not we're able to build on strengths by reflecting these back. and it's parallel in some ways to parents offering specific praise that they can give their children. But also knowing that we're hardwired to have a negativity bias. And that helped us survive as a species, but it's not so great for recognizing and working with strengths, our own and others. So keeping that in mind, applying this framework there are many places to invite parents and children to tell us about their experiences. And next time we'll talk more about specific ways to take our cues and how to pace what we do to align with where the family may be at any given moment. And so, if we hope to stay present and connected, it's so important for us to be mindful of our own responses when we become judgmental or blame or get angry or feel defeated or get disconnected, which is inevitable. But we can think about our own journey and growth. We can think about the families that we've worked with and how we can hold hope and the promise of reconnection over and over again. And with that, I am going to turn this back to Erin.
Thank you, Susan. I would like to thank Susan Blumenfeld for such an exceptional webinar today. Thank you to Caption Colorado for providing today's captioning, and thank you to Jen Curley for making the webinar run so smoothly. Last but not least, thank you all for spending your time with the center. Within the next week, I will send you all a follow-up email with a link of the recording to today's webinar, in addition to the slides and handouts Susan referenced, all of which will eventually be available on our website. You'll also receive a certificate of attendance for your time for today. At the end of the webinar, as soon as you close out, you'll be taken to a very brief evaluation. If you could please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you all again, and we hope you have a great afternoon.